My fiancée was arguing with her roommate when the roommate snapped. At least I don't cheat on my boyfriend when I go out with the girls to a cafe. I walked in at that exact moment and found out it was true. When I asked her to explain, she said, I reached Felicity's apartment building earlier than usual because my shift ended ahead of schedule, and I thought bringing dinner would be a good idea. Nothing extravagant, just something warm to cut through the cold evening. I knew she had been stressed with work, and I wanted to surprise her with something simple. I walked up the stairs instead of taking the elevator because I liked the anticipation, but halfway up I started hearing voices. Felicity's voice had a sharp edge I didn't hear often, and Briar, her roommate, sounded even sharper. At first, I thought it was a normal argument between roommates, but the tone kept rising, and every step I took made it sound more like something that had been building for a long time. I slowed down, hoping I was wrong, because something inside me had already started tightening. When I reached the hallway, I heard Briar shout something that made the air feel heavier. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to know this wasn't about dishes or rent. Felicity was accusing Briar of sabotaging her personal life, and Briar shot back with something that stopped me in place. She said she was tired of covering for Felicity every time she disappeared at night and blamed her for everything. Felicity yelled louder, insisting Briar should stay out of her relationship, which made no sense because as far as I knew, there was nothing to interfere with. Then Briar snapped. She said the one sentence that would change everything. It came out so loud and so sharp that I heard every syllable with perfect clarity. She shouted that at least she didn't cheat on her boyfriend when she claimed she was going out with the girls to a cafe. I froze for a moment because I couldn't process the sentence fast enough, and then something inside me moved on its own. I walked straight toward the door without thinking about knocking or giving anyone a chance to collect themselves. When I pushed the door open, Felicity was standing in the middle of the living room with her hands thrown up in anger, and Briar looked like she had passed the point of caring about consequences. Both of them turned toward me. Felicity's face shifted instantly from rage to shock, and Briar looked at me like she had been waiting for this exact moment. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that comes from running out of words. It was the kind that arrives when something undeniable has been spoken aloud and everyone realizes nothing can be taken back. Felicity opened her mouth first, trying to string together a reasonable explanation, but her voice trembled in a way that didn't sound like fear of losing me. It sounded like fear of losing control of a story she thought she could keep together forever. I kept my voice steady and asked her what Briar meant. Felicity jumped into an excuse so quickly that I knew she had something prepared long before tonight. She claimed Briar misheard something or twisted her words. Then she shifted the blame onto Briar and said Briar had been jealous of our relationship. Briar didn't even bother to defend herself. She walked past Felicity, grabbed her phone, and held it out to me with a calmness that came from being pushed too far. On her screen was a photo of Felicity sitting in a dimly lit place with someone I didn't recognize. They were leaning closer than any friends needed to be. Felicity tried to swipe the phone out of Briar's hand, but Briar stepped back and told me she didn't want to get involved, yet she refused to keep helping Felicity lie. She said she had kept that photo for weeks because she wasn't sure if she should interfere, but she couldn't tolerate Felicity throwing accusations around anymore. Felicity snapped back, calling the photo meaningless. She said the man was someone who worked with her and that they met only twice. She claimed Briar misunderstood everything. I didn't respond immediately because my mind kept replaying Briar's sentence. The cafe lie was the one she used the most. Every time she said she was out with friends, she claimed they ended up at the same cafe near the river. It was practically her default excuse. Suddenly, all those nights that used to feel harmless started lining up differently. Before I could ask anything else, something unexpected happened. Their neighbor, Margot, appeared in the doorway with her arms folded. She lived next door and always complained about loud noises, but this time she looked at Felicity with a strange mix of disappointment and fatigue. She calmly mentioned she had seen Felicity sneaking out at dawn on several different mornings, wearing different outfits from the night before and getting into a rideshare car quickly. She said she never wanted to get involved in other people's problems, but she was tired of being kept awake. Felicity's face drained of color. She tried to accuse Margot of spying, but it sounded hollow. That was when the second twist hit me. Briar admitted she once tried to confront Felicity privately about the sneaking around because she didn't want to watch her destroy her engagement. Instead of listening, Felicity had threatened to kick her out of the apartment and claimed she could make the landlord choose sides. The room felt smaller with every second. I asked Felicity why she kept giving me the same story about cafe nights. She started stumbling through an explanation so quickly that she contradicted herself within the first sentence. She claimed she worked late and met friends afterward, but then she claimed the photo was taken during her lunch break. Then she said she barely knew the man, but her body language betrayed her. Then the third twist landed. When Briar handed me a small envelope she had kept hidden in her drawer, I didn't know what to expect. Inside were receipts for rides that matched the nights Felicity claimed she was out with the girls. Every receipt was paid with my credit card because I had once added it to her account to help her after a late shift when she forgot her wallet. Each one led to locations nowhere near the cafe she talked about. My hand tightened around the receipts because the betrayal didn't stop at emotional lines. It extended into financial lines I didn't even consider vulnerable. Felicity tried to snatch the envelope, but I stepped back. Her panic rose so fast it felt like she was drowning in her own lies. She asked me why I believed Briar, but the more she spoke, the more her explanations unraveled. She blamed work pressure, bad judgment, misunderstandings, and everything except herself. She even accused Briar of sabotaging the receipts, which didn't make sense since the rideshare timestamps matched the nights I clearly remembered. The moment she accidentally slipped up and mentioned the wrong date, a date she spent with me and my family, was the moment the entire story collapsed. She claimed she had been out with friends on that particular night, but Briar immediately reminded her she was at our dinner. When Felicity realized she had trapped herself, she broke down in anger instead of remorse. She blamed everyone in the room, even Margot, who didn't know her well. I didn't yell because yelling would have made the chaos feel louder. Instead, I stood there with the receipts in my hand, understanding that something fundamental had shifted beyond repair. The twists weren't just moments of shock. They revealed a pattern Felicity had been weaving long before tonight. It wasn't one mistake or one lie. It was a structure she built with precision and arrogance, expecting no one to notice. Part 1 ended the moment Felicity tried to walk toward me and explain again, but Briar stepped between us and told her to stop pretending. The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence that arrives when the truth has already taken over and can't be forced back into hiding. I left Felicity's apartment without telling her where I was going because I didn't know myself until I was already halfway down the stairs. My mind wasn't racing. It was moving with a strange clarity that came only after the shock settled and the patterns began fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I had been staring at upside down. The receipts in my pocket were more than proof. They were coordinates. Every address matched a specific part of the city I never visited, but someone else clearly did. Someone named Jace. I kept repeating the name in my mind, not because it meant anything yet, but because it came attached to the first photo Briar showed me. I reached my car and started driving before the emotional part of my brain could interfere. The city looked unusually calm, but I felt something tightening in my chest that wouldn't relax until I faced the other side of this story. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't try to prepare for what I was going to say because I had no idea what kind of man Jace would turn out to be. I only knew one thing with certainty. Leaving this unanswered would eat at me more than any confrontation could. When I arrived at the building listed in one of the receipts, I recognized it immediately. Not because I had been there recently, but because I had been there years ago. The memory arrived slowly, then hit me with full force. I had been here once to help a friend of a friend who was getting evicted. A young guy with messy hair, shaking hands, and a stack of overdue notices he didn't know how to deal with. His name was Jace. I remembered giving him some cash to help him catch up on rent because he seemed desperate enough to make terrible decisions. I never saw him again after that day. I didn't expect to. And now his name was tied to my fiancée. I took a deep breath and knocked on his door. It didn't take long for footsteps to approach. When the door opened, I recognized him instantly. His hair was shorter, and he looked healthier than he did years ago, but the face was unmistakable. He stared at me with wide confusion, like he had been struck by a memory he had hoped to forget. He asked if I was the same Coleman who helped him a long time ago. I nodded, and for a moment he looked relieved, as if he owed me something he never had a chance to repay. Then I said Felicity's name. The relief vanished so quickly that it left the air feeling colder. He stepped aside and let me in. The apartment was small but clean, with a single lamp creating a soft glow. There were 2 mugs on the table, but only one looked recently used. He sat down slowly, like he needed a moment to decide whether he wanted to be honest or careful. I asked him how he knew Felicity. He rubbed the back of his neck and admitted he met her at a bookstore months ago and thought she was single because that's what she told him. He said she always claimed she lived alone and kept her personal life complicated due to unresolved family issues. He said she never mentioned a fiancé and certainly never mentioned me. Then the first twist arrived. Felicity had been paying part of his rent for months. When he said it, I felt a numbness crawl through my body because I realized she used the money from my account to support him during a period when she pretended to be struggling with her own bills. He said she framed it as temporary help while he was in between jobs. He didn't feel comfortable with it, but accepted because she insisted. I didn't know whether to be angry at him or simply stunned by how far her lies stretched. But he didn't look like someone who orchestrated anything. He looked like someone who got pulled into a story he didn't understand. Before I could process more, there was pounding on the door. Hard, frantic, and familiar. Jace looked at me with a mixture of dread and confusion. When he opened the door slightly, Felicity shoved it wider and stepped inside before he could react. She looked wild, not in a dramatic way, but in a desperate way that showed she had sprinted here. She immediately accused me of following her and claimed I was trying to ruin her friendships. I didn't respond because her tone had no connection to reality. She then turned to Jace and tried to spin a story about Briar framing her. Jace looked at her with disbelief that slowly turned into anger because the lies were unraveling right in front of him. Then the second twist hit. Behind Felicity, someone else appeared in the hallway. It was Rowan, her sister. She looked out of breath and held a ring of keys in her hand. My spare keys. She said Felicity told her to come to my house and remove a few things before I returned home. She didn't know why, but admitted she felt something was wrong and came here instead after Briar called her. Hearing this made Felicity lose the last thread of control she had been holding on to. She accused Rowan of betraying her, but Rowan ignored her and looked directly at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was worry mixed with apology. The situation spiraled faster than anyone could manage. Jace confronted Felicity about lying to him. Rowan confronted her about manipulating the family. I didn't need to say anything because every new word from Felicity contradicted the previous one. Then the third twist arrived with the subtlety of a knife sliding into a table. Stella, Briar's friend, messaged me at that exact moment. I felt my phone buzz and checked it because the screen lit up with a video thumbnail. Stella wrote that she didn't want to get involved, but felt I deserved to know everything. The video showed Felicity in a parking lot kissing someone else entirely. Not Jace. Not a stranger. Someone named Vaughn. I noticed a company badge on his shirt, which meant he wasn't outside her personal circle. He was part of her work life. I didn't show Felicity the video immediately. I didn't need to yet. The power shift in the room had already made her panic. She claimed everything was orchestrated to destroy her. She said Briar hated her. She said Jace misunderstood. She said Rowan was confused. She blamed everyone except herself. Jace finally told her to leave. Rowan stepped closer to me and whispered that she didn't know how deep the lies went, but she saw enough to understand Felicity had been hiding far more than anyone assumed. When Felicity realized she couldn't spin the story anymore, she stormed out of the apartment with enough force to rattle the door frame. Rowan followed her, but only to make sure she didn't cause more problems in the hallway. Jace sat down on the couch and looked exhausted. I thanked him for telling the truth and walked out without anger because anger would have made everything feel louder than necessary. What I felt instead was something sharper, something that made every memory with Felicity feel suspicious by default. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Stella. She said Briar wanted to talk and had more to show me. Part 2 ended with the understanding that Felicity's lies weren't tangled. They were layered like a structure she built with precision, expecting no one to ever look closely. I barely made it home before Briar called. Her voice sounded steadier than Felicity's ever did, but there was tension underneath it that told me she wasn't calling to apologize or soften the situation. She said she found something in Felicity's room that she couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't ask what it was because the last thing I wanted was another hint of bad news hanging over my head. I told her to come by my place instead. I couldn't stand being in Felicity's apartment again after everything that happened there. When Briar arrived, she didn't waste time on greetings. She stepped inside, sat at my table, and placed a small stack of envelopes and a flash drive in front of me. She explained that Felicity often left her things scattered around the apartment and assumed Briar never paid attention. She said she didn't go through Felicity's belongings intentionally, but she noticed a few items hidden under the couch one day and recognized one of the envelopes from earlier fights they had. When she checked them, she realized it wasn't private correspondence. It was a pile of warnings from her workplace. They weren't addressed to me, so she brought them. The first twist of the night arrived when I opened the top envelope. It was a written notice from Felicity's company stating she had been warned for inappropriate interactions with a coworker, Vaughn. Not another man. The same man from the video Stella sent me. The notice described unprofessional behavior, lingering in restricted areas, and messages that crossed boundaries. When I opened the second envelope, I found another warning, this time mentioning an internal complaint filed by Vaughn himself. I understood instantly why he had looked exhausted on the phone and why he tried to distance himself from her. Briar looked uncomfortable, almost guilty for being the messenger of all this, but she added one more detail that changed the tone of the room entirely. She said she once overheard Felicity talking to someone about a backup plan in case I became difficult. and she didn't realize what it meant until now. She apologized for not telling me earlier, but I didn't hold it against her. Felicity manipulated people like she rehearsed it every night in front of a mirror. Before Briar could say anything else, someone knocked on my door. For a moment, I expected Felicity, but when I opened it, I saw Rowan instead. She looked drained, with a kind of defeated expression that belonged to someone forced to confront a truth they tried to avoid for too long. She stepped inside quietly and asked if Briar had told me everything. I gestured to the table, and she stared at the envelopes as if she'd seen ghosts. Rowan said she went back to Felicity's place after the confrontation at Jace's apartment. She wanted to help her calm down, but Felicity wasn't interested in calming anything. She had thrown accusations at Rowan, claiming she betrayed her by siding with me. Rowan said she tried to reason with her, but realized Felicity wasn't listening. She said Felicity had been spiraling for months, hiding more secrets than anyone could track. Then Rowan admitted something she had been holding back. She said Felicity once asked her to lie to me about a trip she never took. According to Felicity, it was supposed to be a harmless excuse to buy time. Rowan didn't do it, but she never told me because she hoped her sister would fix herself before things got worse. Rowan didn't defend Felicity. She didn't justify her. She simply said she feared this breakdown had been coming for a long time. The second twist of the night arrived when my phone rang. It was Vaughn. I didn't want to answer at first, but ignoring it felt like another loose thread waiting to choke the entire situation. When I answered, Vaughn spoke in a low, composed voice that made it clear he didn't enjoy being dragged into this mess. He said he wanted to clarify something because he heard from HR that Felicity might try to flip the story. He said she once waited for him outside the office after a late shift and tried to start something. He declined immediately, but she didn't take it well. She kept messaging him, insisting she deserved stability from someone who recognized her value. When he didn't respond, she began sending longer messages that became emotional, then hostile, then apologetic. He didn't reply to any of them. Eventually, he filed a complaint because he was afraid she would escalate. Vaughn said he reached out because Felicity had already told a few coworkers that he pursued her, not the other way around. He didn't want his reputation destroyed because of her lies. He apologized to me, even though he didn't owe me anything, and said he respected how calmly I handled the situation in Jace's apartment because he had seen Felicity lose control many times. When I hung up, Briar and Rowan looked at me with the same realization I felt deep in my chest. Felicity didn't simply cheat. She built entire narratives around each person she interacted with, shaping their role to suit her needs. Then came the loud, violent knock on my door. For a moment, no one moved. I opened it cautiously, and Felicity stood outside with her coat half-zipped, her hair messy, and her eyes filled with a strange mixture of anger and desperation. She forced her way inside without waiting for permission, completely ignoring Rowan and Briar. She started pacing around the room, accusing me of humiliating her and claiming I betrayed her by involving other people. She didn't acknowledge the evidence. She didn't explain anything. She simply raged as if she were the one being wronged. Then the third twist arrived. Before anyone could respond, the hallway lights flickered, and Mr. Hemsley, the landlord, walked up to my open door. He looked irritated and said several neighbors reported shouting and someone banging on doors. He said he had been observing Felicity's behavior around the building for weeks. He pointed out that this wasn't the first time she had caused disturbances. Then he said something that silenced everyone. He claimed he received complaints of unfamiliar men slipping into my place with Felicity when I was away, and he didn't address it earlier because he thought we were in some unusual arrangement. When he realized Coleman didn't know any of this, he felt obligated to intervene. His tone wasn't angry. It was resigned, like he wished he had stepped in sooner. Felicity stood frozen for the first time that night. She didn't scream or argue. She didn't blame anyone. She simply backed toward the door as if her mind was finally connecting the consequences she had been avoiding. Rowan stepped toward her and said she couldn't defend her anymore. Briar said nothing because silence was more powerful than anything she could have added. I didn't speak either. The silence was enough. Felicity turned and left without another word, but there was something in her expression that told me she hadn't accepted the truth yet. She wasn't done. She was regrouping. Part 3 closed on a heavy realization. Felicity wasn't spiraling because she was caught. She was spiraling because she realized her stories could no longer protect her. Tomorrow would be worse. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. My body felt too aware, as if waiting for something else to crash through the door. Every hour, I replayed the conversations with Briar, Rowan, Jace, Vaughn, and even Mr. Hemsley. It all formed one heavy timeline that made sense only because it was chaotic. Felicity had woven so many stories together that the entire network collapsed the moment one thread snapped. I knew she wasn't finished, and the silence of the night confirmed that she was planning her next move. By morning, I decided to focus on work because sitting at home only made every thought louder. I left earlier than usual, hoping the cold air would clear my head. It didn't. When I arrived at the office, I noticed two of my coworkers whispering to each other, but they stopped when I passed by. I assumed they knew nothing because Felicity wouldn't dare show up here. This place mattered to me. It wasn't something she had access to. At least, that was what I believed for the first few minutes. I had barely sat at my desk when I heard someone call my name from the hallway. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't calm either. It had that trembling insistence that came from someone trying to regain control after losing everything. When I turned around, Felicity was standing there, dressed for work, but clearly unprepared for any conversation. Her hair was tangled, her makeup was uneven, and her breathing was fast enough to draw attention. Before I could say anything, she raised her voice about wanting a second chance and claimed I acted irrationally the night before. Every head in the office turned our way. She kept going, insisting she had reasons for everything, but none of her explanations sounded coherent. She shifted stories quickly, saying she was overwhelmed by stress, then claiming Briar manipulated her, then saying Rowan misunderstood her intentions, then trying to blame Jace for misleading her. The first twist arrived when she mentioned Jace's name loudly. My coworker Niles, who sat near the entrance, stood up and asked if she meant the same Jace who used to work with his cousin at a warehouse years ago. He said Jace was known for getting involved with too many people at once and borrowing money without returning it. His voice carried through the office, and Felicity stepped back as if someone pulled the floor from under her feet. She didn't expect Jace's reputation to hit her that quickly and publicly. When the situation escalated, security entered the hallway. They approached her calmly and asked her to step outside. She refused at first and tried to grab my arm, insisting she needed to talk to me alone. Security intervened and gently moved her back, guiding her toward the exit while she kept protesting that she deserved to be heard. I followed at a distance because I didn't want things to escalate further. Once outside, she turned on me with a mix of anger and desperation, saying she couldn't lose everything because of one mistake. It was astonishing how she could describe months of deception, financial manipulation, and emotional chaos as a single mistake. I asked her to leave and told her the situation had reached a point where I couldn't trust her. She said trust didn't matter if she loved me. That sentence didn't carry the weight she probably expected. It simply made the emptiness between us feel wider. Security escorted her off the property, and I returned inside with a strange sense of finality. I thought that would be the end of her attempts to force her way back into my life, but I was wrong. The second twist arrived shortly after lunch. My phone buzzed with a message from Jace. He said Felicity visited him earlier, demanding he support her story and claimed that I attacked him. He refused and told her he wanted nothing to do with her anymore. He attached screenshots of their conversation in case I needed protection from whatever she was planning next. The screenshots showed her threatening to expose him unless he backed her up, which only made him block her immediately. Seeing his fear made me realize she had entered a reckless phase where she didn't care whom she damaged as long as she could rewrite the narrative. The third twist arrived that same afternoon when Vaughn messaged me. He said Felicity showed up at their workplace too, demanding he retract his complaint and insisting she would deny everything he said. HR had already been alerted earlier because of her previous warnings, and they decided to review the entire pattern of her behavior. Vaughn said she quit on the spot before they could place her on mandatory leave. The company would finalize the paperwork, but she wasn't employed there anymore. She had lost her job, her apartment was at risk due to Mr. Hemsley's concerns, and her relationships were collapsing simultaneously. But the fallout didn't stop there. Later that evening, I received a call from a man named Corwin. He introduced himself slowly, as if he wasn't sure I would recognize his name. He said he saw a video online of Felicity screaming outside my workplace because someone had recorded part of the incident. He said it reminded him of something he had gone through years ago. He explained that he dated Felicity before she met me, and he ended the relationship because she created overlapping stories with multiple men and always shifted blame when confronted. Corwin said he wanted to warn me for a long time, but never found the courage because he didn't know how to approach someone who clearly loved her. Hearing his story didn't make me angry. It made everything fall into place with a clarity I didn't expect. She didn't create chaos because of me. She created chaos because it was her pattern. I was one chapter in a book she had been writing for years, and she repeated the same script with different men. By nightfall, Rowan called again with one final update. Felicity had packed her things while Rowan stood by to make sure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. According to Rowan, Felicity planned to leave the city for a while. She said she couldn't handle the humiliation and wanted to start somewhere new. Rowan sounded exhausted, but also relieved, because she no longer had to protect a sister who refused to face her actions. As I hung up the phone, I realized the storm had finally passed. There was no victory in it. No triumphant moment. Just quiet clarity. The chaos didn't end in a dramatic climax. It ended because every person in Felicity's life stepped back at the same time, leaving her alone with the consequences she created. I sat in my living room, watching the dim light bounce off the walls, and understood something simple. The truth had been there for a long time. It just needed enough noise to rise to the surface. Felicity didn't disappear. She faded out of my life the same way a flame burns through the last of its wick, loud at first, then weaker, until it's completely gone.